Yo, what's going on YouTube? It's your girl Alicia X Life, and welcome back. Today we're going to be checking out a music breakdown. Well, I'm going to be doing a music breakdown live. um, so I'm doing it for Honkai Impact's Sele's 4.8 PV, which is the VIOLINIST one, the Starcasm one, the new battle suit, the new battle suit. It's super duper cool. The PV is called Phantom of the Theater, and it gets pretty theatrical. I already did a reaction to the PV. If you want to check that out, you can. But this one is going to be a music breakdown. For those of you who don't know, I've actually been a violinist for 17, going into 18 years now, and I also went to music school, so it means a lot to me to be able to talk about music. So here we are today, checking out this music and breaking it down a little bit. Let's do it! Before we get started, make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell for notifications. Also, don't forget to hit the like button. Hit that mug. Hit that like button. Yeah, yeah, yeah. A little smack, smack. So one of the coolest parts about miHoYo in general is that I talked about this in my breakdown of Fallen Rosemary, the Rita battlesuit, that they choose to do like a lack of instrumentation a lot of the time, where they will play something very softly, and they will also intentionally choose to do their additional instruments over time. So right here we hear a music box, and almost it feels like a music box at least, and slowly each additional piece gets added in. We get our flutes in particular, which is something that I really want to exemplify of, right? Is that, oh, actually that is so cool. I just noticed this. So we have our flute coming in when we see Sele and the blue butterflies, right? But now listen to what gets added in next. The violins and Velivel gets added in as well at the same time, which is a very distinctive choice to make, kind of representing that she is the violins and the flute or woodwinds would be Sele herself. Interesting. Oh my god. Now we're heading into the main theme. So, well, part of the main theme. So this is where the song, the piece gets established in general. So what we had earlier on was kind of like the tease into everything, where we get to flirt with concepts, we get to have a little introduction. It feels very hollowed out in comparison to what's about to come. So now we're hit with these rich sounds, the crunching sounds, the vibration of everything is so intentional. Things are held. Things when they have a decay, the notes are held for a little longer. Like they allow us to resonate with the note after it's played, which is intentionally done with your bow. So in a bow hold, there's different ways to release, right? Most people think that, oh, when you're doing a stroke, you go back and forth, and it kind of goes in that sense, right? But no, bow holds are much more complicated than that. The desire of what you do and the intent of what you do with a bow changes drastically. So in this part, we're going to talk about two things that they do with their bow in particular. But first, we're going to listen, and then we'll talk about it. So now that you heard that little section here, right, is that we could even hear the cellos in particular going dun 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 dun, dun, right? And that is a swooping in motion. This motion is classically used by Vivaldi, and is done with a bow hold that is one of my personal favorite bow holds. I talked about this a little bit when I was checking out the PV itself and talking about that, not the music itself. And it's called a Baroque hold, where where it's perfectly weighted within the bow. You choke up your hold rather than holding it at the hilt. You choke it up a little bit so it has perfect balance between the tip and the hilt, and you're able to do this dip in motion, where you play with the center of the bow. You go dun 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 dun, and when you leave your bow, this is the second part I wanted to talk about. When you leave your bow off the string, you literally lift up. Right? And this technique is done in like a sweeping motion. You lift and you leave it so that it's able to hold a little da, and it's able to echo throughout, like an acoustic sound, which is often used within these orchestras. They'll have acoustic amplifiers. These are wooden amplifiers that are done organically through walls, right? Normally in recording studios and situations, you have sound dampeners, but in proper audio design of these rooms, when they're recording, they have things where there's sound dampening on certain walls, but certain corners actually have these acoustic or wooden amplifiers. And that is what really amplifies that bow in particular and that sound when they leave it off the string. Dun 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 dun. This is such a cool concept. So, for those of you who might not be theater nerds in particular, so brilliant, so brilliant. So the thing about this whole section, that whole section is an interlude, right? And for those of you who might not know what an interlude is, in particular, it is basically when you have a piece that is like a pause. It's a pause within it. Commonly in theater, an interlude would be like there's lots of dialogue, lots of things happening, and the interlude would be the part where the music plays. This does a flip on that concept, where it's like, we're going to listen to music the entire time, but now we're going to have speaking. And this is a little pause, a little breather before introducing the next element. And I think it's just genius, especially for the title of this entire thing, which is Phantom of the Theater. Ooh. Oh! So many things to talk about here. Let me just quickly up the volume for myself, though, because we need to really go into this part here. Dun 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 dun. Wow, okay, so even before we get into this part in particular, so, here we had the little da sound, right? And that was going a little crispy, gave a little something there. And you're wondering, what made that transition so smooth, right? These are such contrasts in sound. How could they possibly work together? It doesn't make sense. Well, this is why. They use a technique called tremolo, and in that, you're able to go on the same note and go different than vibrato. Vibrato is where you're switching between sounds. It's like a wave. That's a wave sound. It's different than trill. Trill is where you go between two different notes. A tremolo is where you go on the same note and you go on it repeatedly and you just go hard in the paint. It establishes. That's its intent. Usually done by cellos or a bass section. Never really done by violins often. Violins often refer to trill, and they'll usually go for vibrato in general. As to vibrato applies to a lot of other strings as well. But when it comes to trill versus tremolo, it's usually tremolo is what the bassists and cellos use. And violas. Violas also get the exception too. But yeah, so that's what makes the transition here so smooth. And then we also have the violins going dun 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 dun. And it's that consistency that we have there building in, right? You don't want to introduce new themes. You don't want to repeat themes from previously because it takes away from a build-up. And they do this masterfully. I love that. Every time they make a decision to remove sound, it's just genius. It's just genius, man. These beat drops consistently. Right? And the transition was the sound effect of the scythe moving. Like, the violin got to have the final say until that sound effect clicked it together, which otherwise would have been silence. Beautiful sound engineering and audio design for that part. Brilliant. So that's a theme that we got introduced to earlier on, like da 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 da. Right? Which, commonly done when you're learning parts is that you'll sing your part to yourself. So you'll hear me do that all the time when doing music breakdowns, is that, in particular, you're going to hear da-na-na-na-na. And with that in mind, since we were introduced to it earlier, we flirted with the concept throughout. It's not something that feels foreign to us. It actually creates it so that we feel comfortable with such a change. When there's such a dynamic change in a song, they need to bring back themes and prior elements so it doesn't feel like you just literally have a new song on hand. And that's what they do beautifully here, is that even though they basically changed genres, it doesn't matter because they're able to like incorporate both elements so well. And then we have like the decay, the da, and it's just soft. It's like a whisper. Nothing static or stagnant about it. It's just enough to give us something going into nothing. And when you have the void approaching, and when you have nothingness approaching, what can you do? Right? What do you bring back? And this is something miHoYo does consistently. Is a reprise. Or a reprise, whichever you want to be, whichever you want to say. As we have our first theme coming back as always. But it's not just that. It's one step beyond that. Whoever thought of this is actually a genius. What's different about it this time around? Right? Sure, we could talk about the visuals. We could talk about the video itself. Yeah, they're the red butterfly, the blue butterfly, and the scale, right? We could talk about that. But music-wise, what do you hear that's different? It's the strength in which you hear. And it's because of the contrast between the two. We had it established early on in the beginning of the song. The strength difference, the fleeting, the magical of Sele versus Veli Welly. And to feel that strength incorporated at the end to represent her is masterful. And that's something that you really have to tip your hat to composers who are able to understand so well, like without video concepts, but just knowing what the character is, what the intent is, and feeling it out and able to accomplish such a masterpiece is incredible. I want to go back for 1 second, just so you can hear it again and compare the two. Listen to how timid that flute is. Like, it's so shy. So shy. And now it holds power. And now the melody itself holds power versus being scared. Two last notes before I head off is that I want to talk a little bit about this part here, which you think that, like, oh, as a violinist, how could you possibly talk about wubs and dubs, right? Well, actually, music theory applies towards everything, and this is where we get to hear something called sforzando, and it's an Italian term. Basically, it means like accented, but more zealously. Like, for example, when you have an accented note, you feel a lot more pressure applied, a lot more like oomph. You should feel oomph applied, right? But the difference is for sforzando is that it's a stronger, richer accent. And that is actually occurs in dubstep and a lot of remixes like that often, right? We hear it a lot in house music drops, we hear it a lot in general, and they tend to like really utilize that when it comes to these remix elements. Bow, 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 bow. Right? It's loud, it's fortissimo, it's added with a bunch of elements, but in particular, the sforzando is where it really shines, and it's a must notice when looking at these parts too. On top of all that, one of the things I was talking about was the sustain of notes. I try to avoid lingo as much as I can, but one thing I did want to mention a little bit too was that we were talking about the echoing and the holding of notes, the appreciation notes that are meant to be held a little longer than intended is something that I always appreciated. These parts this part here is where I wanted to go back to. In this, right, everything echoes. Everything, like sound design wise, echoes. It lasts a little too long constantly. And what that is actually a technique. It's not just, oh, they added some reverb, they added some echo. It's like those are things that they do in post. That's some things that they do in general. But what it actually is sonetto, which is basically the sustaining of a note for longer than it's actually meant to be held, right? For example, if I had like an eighth note and I held it into like similarly fashioned to a quarter note, but not fully, and it bleeds into my other notes, it's an intentional trait, and it's something to really recognize within this part here. So good. Just so good. Anyways, thank you so much for watching my music breakdown. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to mash that like button and hit the subscribe button to become a part of our community. If you want to hear more music breakdowns from me and check out other gaming pieces in general, be sure to let me know in the comments which game, which song you want me to check out, and I will do my best to get around to it. Make sure to love yourself with the people around you and always drink water. And I'll catch you guys on the flip side. See you in the next video. Goodbye. Goodbye.